like movies about gladiators?
Those men wanted to have sex with me.
Great Scott!
Nice beaver.
He's a Cinderella boy.
Ramble is a pussy. Come with me if you want to live.
Hello, and welcome to Retro Ramble. I'm Charlie McGhee, and today I'm also going to be playing the part of George McGhee, because he's not here. Worry not, it's only part 2 of our tribute to Sir Roger Moore. The reason George isn't here today is that he has been was tasked, as this has already been recorded, with interviewing Mark O'Connell, the author behind the highly acclaimed novel Catching Bullets, Memoirs of a Bond Fan, an essential read for any Bond fan, and a person with unique knowledge of what goes into each and every James Bond film. For the uninitiated, in addition to being a well-established comedy writer, working for the likes of the BBC, Channel 4 and Channel 5, and also working with Ronnie Corbett, Mark has unique access to the Eon production family, Eon being the company responsible for the James Bond franchise. George caught up with Mark and talked to him what it's like behind the scenes of a James Bond film, what these guys were like in real life when you get to meet them, and where he sees the franchise going next. Obviously, as part of our tribute, they will pay special attention to Sir Roger Moore, discussing their favourite films and the like. We'll be back with a typical Retro Ramble episode covering the classic 80s action film by Richard Donner, The Goonies, so please check that out when it's available. So without further ado, here is the interview between George and Mark O'Connell. Enjoy. I'm delighted to welcome Mark O'Connell to the Retro Ramble podcast. Mark is a comedy writer, author, and most importantly, a Bond fan. His first novel, Catching Bullets, Memoirs of a Bond Fan, is essential reading for anyone who grew up in the age of VHS, so key for a lot of our Retro Ramble listeners. Mark's experience of growing up with Bond was a little different from the average fan. His granddad was the chauffeur of Bond producer Cubby Broccoli, and it's a touching mix of memoir, nostalgia, film critique, and Bond trivia. Mark recently wrote a touching obituary for Sir Roger Moore in The Guardian and had the pleasure of meeting the legend a few years ago. So, Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, good evening, hello.
What was it like greeting Sir Roger?
Utterly surreal. It's 3 or 4 years later. I don't think it's sunk in yet. I don't know if I want it to sink in, but it was lovely. It was never guaranteed, and he was doing his 2013 autumn tour, and he was at the Guildford Civic Hall, as it's used to be known. And I do know his manager and biographer Gareth, and there was no promises, but we were just sort of beckoned through the back sort of the stage door, and it was literally like, oh my God, I've not actually felt this nervous since waiting to meet Santa at sort of at Debenhams in the 80s, and this was like wow, and it was utterly surreal. I was with my husband to be at the time, and our mate Pat, and all of us were big Roger fans, and we didn't expect anything, and if anything I cut it short because I didn't want to be that guy that was just a bit sort of hanging on. There's one or two other people that wanted to say hi. He was utterly charming, and he put us all utterly at ease really, really quickly. I remember my partner was like going to get a photo, and he was sort of shaking, and Roger made this really nice quip about the photographer should not be shaking or laughing, and I think that sort of just summed it up. And he'd mentioned how because he did have diabetes in his latter years, and how he couldn't drink, but there was a cheeky upturned empty bottle of champagne in an ice bucket, and I thought, that's Roger Moore, that's the Bond I know and love. So yes, to sort of answer that, it was just utterly surreal, but just really nice. I mean, when you sort of think about it, the amount of people he must have met, and he had an utter skill that he'd obviously honed over all those decades, and he just made you feel just very special, and he was just genuinely interested as well. He's interested in the book, and he said he promised he'd read it, and 6 months later he came back with an email, and I was like, oh my God, it's some cease and desist sort of email, but it wasn't. It was the exact opposite, and I thought, hang on, I've just got an email from James Bond. This is, and also a guy in his late 80s as well. That was sort of also a great thing. So yeah, it was a very blessed moment, to sum it up.
From all the sort of stuff I've read as you come out that since his passing, is that nobody has a bad word to say about him. Everyone said about how much of a gentleman he was, how charming, how, he would go out of his way. And obviously, his UNICEF work speaks volumes. But yeah, there's so many sort of touching sort of stories that came out. I don't know if you saw, there was a one story doing the rounds on Facebook about a little boy meeting him in the airport. And,
that's right. Yeah,
getting his autograph. And it just sounds like a legend through and through, which is it's nice to know.
He also had I want to get this in. Actually, I said this the other day to someone, but he also, and I didn't really notice it perhaps till after he passed, but he had a very brilliant skill at being concerned for people, or just making sure everyone was all right. And I think that's sort of reflected at most in what he did for UNICEF, where he took it extremely seriously, and it was a very personal chapter in his life, but he really genuinely cared for people. And I think that's also come out of the stories, like the little kid that met him at the airport, and then again 30 years later. And I've heard stories from, my grandfather being a chauffeur who worked on the Bonds. I heard the stories there, but all these sort of the electricians and the crew. There's so many people that said, I went on a holiday with Roger Moore. Roger Moore went on holiday with my dad, who was a carpenter. All these sort of different stories that he wasn't sort of A-list in his ability to reach out to people.
He seemed very sort of self-critical in the interviews, and obviously in My Word Is My Bond. He doesn't rate himself much as an actor, but he seemed very humble and, self-deprecating. So
he was a brilliant actor, because it's actually, I've tried it and I've seen others do it. It's really hard to do nothing on camera. It's a real microscope, a movie camera, and to make it look like you're doing nothing and pulling it off, that is a massive skill. Very few people have it. Michael Caine is one. I'd say Pierce Brosnan is another, if we keep him with the Bond. Yeah. But it's a very careful skill, and it's also partly a yesteryear skill. It's from a different era of sort of acting and movies and TV. But he had it, and he put himself down a lot. I think that was part of his sort of survival mechanism, and it worked.
True. And you're right. It's a classical technique, and in sort of editing these days, it's more everything's so quickly cut. You don't really get long sort of lingering shots anymore, do you?
No, because editors edit the performance. They often edit the beat and the moment and create the drama, as they always have. But if you look at those films, Roger Moore's really holding the screen. There's a lot of reactions there. He's reacting all the time. Actors don't act, they react, and you can see him reacting a lot. And that is a skill. And, I know he was the first to line up and say, I'm maybe not a good actor, but I think he was wrong.
But yeah, you're right. He held the screen, and that's something that Charlie and I touched on in our discussion, that even if the films were mediocre or a bit ropey, he's still, you're still captivated by his performance, by his presence. Which leads me on to what did you watch in his memory? I saw the supermarkets were shamefully cashing in and had all the sort of the Roger Moore Bond DVDs on display. But did you watch anything with the news to sort of to indulge yourself?
I went back to some interviews. I think it was a week later, I went up to the Odeon Covent Garden when they were doing the double bill tribute charity screening for UNICEF. And so watching sort of Spy Who Loved Me, it was actually quite emotional, because Gareth, his manager, was a couple of rows behind us, was surrounded by friends, some of which had worked on the Bond films. And when his name came up, I sort of thought, do we clap or do we, and then it was just a silent moment. But so I think Spy Who Loved Me was the one I went back to, but I'm going to go back to them all, I'm sure. In fact, mates are pushing to have a Live and Let Die night around their house with their massive big screen, so we'll be doing that soon as well.
Yeah, very nice. I think we were wanting to dig out Spy Who Loved Me as well, but sort of looking through our DVD collection, my Bond collection was in storage because I'm sort of between houses at the moment, so we had to settle for Man with a Golden Gun. That does have a bit of a kitsch appeal for us, and obviously great performance from Christopher Lee.
There's no settling for Man with a Golden Gun. You don't settle for that film. You look forward to it and enjoy it.
Yeah, I think the go-to would be, and most people would agree that Spy Who Loved Me has it all, really. Yeah. I watched that at Somerset House a few years ago, and it was amazing just to watch it with a huge audience as well.
Yeah, that was actually what was quite nice about the screening for his tribute, that yes, these films have aged and, evolved, we have rather as audience members, but people they weren't mocking it. The humor was great. The ridiculous beats were still ridiculous beats, but my God, that film, as an example, zips by. Suddenly it's Shane Rimmer time, and I'm like, what? We're here already? Because sometimes when you go back to films you love and that are part of your life, when you actually sit and watch them in a big screen, sometimes they drag, or there's sort of longer moments where they're not doing much. But not at all. And it was brilliant to see a sort of 40-year-old Bond film holding up extremely well.
Yeah, no, I mean it's one of the greats. I think it's definitely in my top 5. Though it is a tough one when you're sort of trying to rank your Bond films, because I suppose it does depend on mood. In terms of your book, Catching Bullets, brilliantly encapsulates the golden days of the video store, being at the mercy of TV schedules, setting the video recorder, sort of missing bits off, going through the adverts, that sort of thing. And Bond as a character has always changed with the times. And again, that's, something that you touch on, and how we sort of, they tap into the sort of those, cultural, what's happening at the time. Do you think he's going to adapt to the way that the current sort of entertainment industry is? there's with Amazon and Netflix, we're in the golden age of TV. Do you think Bond would would there be potential for a Bond series, a mini series, or dare I say it, could you expect Sony to threaten something like the Moneypenny Diaries or M, the Early Years, in a shared universe?
I must admit that the sort of lines between TV and cinema are slightly blurring, and I think it's all for the good. Television's definitely going through a second or third golden age, US TV particularly. I can hear what you say. I think Bond, it's partly fueled by the nostalgia for all those previous films, but I think the sense of ownership with Bond is a bit like Star Wars or sometimes Superman or Lord of the Rings. People will still physically want those films. And I'm not old school about how people see that. If a kid becomes a Bond fan because he happens to see half a trailer on his phone on the bus home, I think that doesn't matter, because our entry points and our entry methods are all totally different with Bond and the other big franchises. And I think the importance is that you get into them. So people, I can never understand, even to this day, how people can watch a film on the commute home on their, I suppose if I did it every day, I'd want to kill the time with good things like a movie. The streaming thing, I think at the moment, Bond is very much a cinematic event. It's a theatrical event, physically and sort of creatively. So the idea of perhaps, shifting emphasis and going off into that sort of shared universe, I don't think that's part of the plan, or might be on the immediate horizon. I can't see it happening. Also, it's a massive undertaking to do just one Bond film.
That's true.
So the idea of, because Eon they're very adamant of getting the quality right and getting the product right, and I think perhaps the idea of splintering off and doing other things, even if they oversaw it, I don't know if that's quite where they're at, in their thinking.
Yeah, no, it's as you say, they are still the sort of the typical blockbuster or, event movie. I suppose that Bond, it's a big Christmas release. The same as, as you say, Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, you have to look forward to, the whole family, get everyone together and go and see it over Christmas.
Yes.
So yes, I think we're in agreement that it needs to be on the kept on the big screen for as long as possible. And
also the Broccoli's, Barbara particularly, but the sort of whole creative and family setup they've got, they're very movie people. They're feature film people. For Barbara, I would suggest that it's the whole process of making the film. I think she calls it the circus of assembling the circus and touring with the circus. I think that's part of the appeal for them. The end product is obviously vital, and getting the audiences in and to appreciate what they do is vital. But the whole project and production is part of why they're Bond fans and why they do it. So I think we will still have Bond motion pictures. I think there'll still be big theatrical events.
It's a good point, because we're in such a studio-driven industry now. I mean, if you look at the sort of the Disney machine with Marvel and Star Wars, you've got obviously all the comic book films that are dictated by the studios. There's sort of the age of the producer is kind of, there's not so much focus on individual producers anymore. And am I right in thinking, do Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, they don't produce anything else. Their sole focus is Bond films. Is that right?
No, actually, no, not at all.
Okay.
They do produce other stuff together and with other producers. Barbara's very keen on promoting new talent and stories that aren't perhaps going to be the biggest blockbuster in the world. They're currently in post-production on a film called Film Stars Don't Die in Liverpool, which is based on an early 80s novel, which is a fascinating story about Gloria Graham, the 40s and 50s Hollywood movie star who ended up spending her last years and days up in Liverpool with a journalist, and it's Annette Bening's playing the lead, and Julie Walters is in it, and Vanessa Redgrave, and Jamie Bell. So there's that, and there was also a film a couple of years back called A Silent Storm that Barbara produced, where she really pushed and helped new writers, new directors, and new producers as well. She's very keen on nurturing new producers. Plus, they've got all their stage productions. I saw the literally amazing, probably the best piece of theatre I've ever seen, back in March at the Royal Court in London, which was an adaptation of Robert Evans' book, The Kid Stays in the Picture, which was just a stunning production that Barbara was very hooked into and nurtured, and because I think Bob Evans knew her father as well.
Oh, yeah. So I wasn't even aware of the theatre stuff. No,
oh yeah, theatre. I think perhaps a few years back it was announced they were going to sort of do a production thing with a television company. I don't know what's quite happened with that. But yeah, I think Barbara she loves stories. She likes finding the story and finding people to tell the story. And I think that's very, she did an indie film called, I think, Radiator a couple of years back that no one saw, but it was very personal to her. And I think at the time she said that, I don't just want to make films for boys, so she's, yeah. And then on top of that, they do a lot of, Barbara's, I don't know if she still is at the moment, but she was a high patron of BAFTA and lots of women in film initiatives. So yes, they're actually, to answer you, they're very plugged in and doing lots of different things. And it feeds back into Bond as well. It working with new writers, new casting agents, you can see it. Helen McCrory was in Skyfall, and then suddenly Barbara's working on a film that's cast Helen McCrory's husband, Damian Lewis, as the lead. These relationships are important to Bond. A few people get a bit hissy about, why can't they just make Bond? Well, Barbara and Michael are creatives. They want to create.
Yeah, and there's obviously, people can argue that the films are formulaic, but it's a formula, and obviously it needs tweaking, and there is a certain magic to it that they've been going for, is it 60 years now?
55.
Yeah.
The last 55 years. I always think it's less of a formula, more of a recipe where they've got to pick different ingredients. Some, might be standard, some might be obvious, but they'll just fleck it with different ingredients, different produce. And I think that's where it's a formula, but I think they'll never admit it makes it easier. I don't think that formula makes it easier to do the next film. If anything, it's the opposite.
Well, as you say, it's a bit like a machine. There's so many moving parts and so many people involved in making such an event film. It must take a bit of time. But that leads, it's been, just almost 2 years since Spectre, and there's the sort of the ongoing rumours is Daniel Craig retiring, even though he's contracted to do one more. The film rights, I think have Sony got the rights for one more guaranteed, is that right?
And it's not been announced anything's guaranteed. It's still, Sony, their contract ended with Spectre, the last Bond film, but they, which has left sort of Eon and Bond in a bit of a limbo, but they've been looking at other companies to sort of get into bed in a Bond type, well, not in a Bond type way, but to sort of get into a business bed with different companies. And I'm sure an announcement will be out there when the ink is dry.
So what are your thoughts? Do you think Craig will come back? And if decides not to, who would you like to see in the role? I know it's a tough question, but I'd be interested to get your thoughts.
Yeah, my hunch and feeling is that Craig will return. There's a few factors in place. Getting a director that everyone's happy with, getting a script everyone's happy with, and there's a little bit of sort of chicken and egg catch-22 stuff going on, where a new studio will obviously want to have some claim and input into directors and writers. But I believe a script has been written or being worked on by Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, who've got a good track record with Eon. So that's in the works. The Bond production cogs rarely stop at Eon House. They're always working on something or researching or investigating or looking at new business partners and new ways of filming, new ways of enhancing local film production. But I do feel Craig's got one left in him. I don't want 4 to be the new sort of maximum of Bond tenures. I think 5's a good round number. And also it's going to be the 25th Bond film, which may or may not have some resonance for Eon. They might want to sort of mark it with a proven actor or start again. And to answer your question about who could it be, who knows? I didn't call Craig out, although I do remember when Layer Cake came out, I thought, my God, if that's not a Bond audition, and then I don't know what it is, and then a year later it proved it was very much a Bond audition. There's a few names out there. I always get asked this, and I try and struggle to remember who I would think's the best one. I think Fassbender would be amazing as Bond.
Yeah, I think he'd be, speaking of Bond auditions, after seeing him in Inglourious Bastards, I was just like, that guy needs to be Bond. But I think, sadly, the ship might have sailed. He might be too big, too old, too busy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe it's awful to say someone in their 40s is possibly, too old for the role of Bond. But it's not just doing 1 or 2 films in the next 2 or 3 years. It's having a window of 10 years, and Craig's already had the role for 10 years. But yeah, Fassbender would definitely be. He's probably my top of the wannabe list. But then there's also Dan Stevens, who I think's a really good actor. Also, he's not known by everyone. Bond tends to be. Yeah, that's everyone recognises, but no one knows.
Yeah, it can't be too big. No, I'd agree with you. Dan Stevens is a favourite of mine. Have you seen The Guest?
You know what? I haven't. I've got it on my hard drive, and I'm never quite, the mood's, especially with this heat at the moment, the mood's never quite there to watch it, but I definitely do want to see it.
Yeah, check it out. That's I think that's his sort of Bond audition. He's quite sort of, you go into it thinking, that bloke off Downton Abbey, but he certainly kicks ass on that.
Yeah, also Barbara, it's been proven the last 10, 15 years, she really rates good British actors when, you've got Robbie Coltrane, Judi Dench, and then plus all the European actors, Javier Bardem and Monica Bellucci. She really rates actors, and she, through the theatre work as well, she goes to the theatre a lot as well, and there'll be people out there she's probably had her eye on that we might not ever know.
So you've obviously had a long-running close relationship with the Eon family, and your book, you talk about the various sort of mementos that your granddad Jimmy would bring back. What's the best memento you have from the Eon partnership that you've experienced?
Well, if it's physical things, I always rate. I got a watch from Cubby, which was which I did actually. It's in the book. I did actually accidentally destroy it.
Yes.
I wore it at school, which was a big mistake. And I looked at it the other day, and I was just like nearly in tears again. But so that was always a cool thing. And also, just like I remember one of the first things I got was the Octopussy soundtrack on cassette. And it had some sort of writing and notes on these sleeve notes.
Oh, wow.
And it didn't make any sense, but I thought, I was just told it's from The Office. It was my granddad would always say, it's from The Office. But I suppose the ultimate memento, and it's something that fortunately we're privileged to still have today, and that's just the memory of going to see the film or see whichever new film is coming up, perhaps a few days or a month before it comes out. And that's always a blessing. And I think the whole point, that ritual of going to the cinema, and it's often in the West End in London way early on a Saturday or Sunday morning, and it's the only time we ever go up to London really, really early, and it's like sort of 28 days later, and we're there for Bond and no one knows it. And that sort of stealth subterfuge of seeing those films in that early context, that's sort of what is still of great value to me as a fan, and also as someone that's grandfather worked on the films.
Yes, definitely. Well, no, one of my favourite memories, and you might have actually been there, bizarrely. I won tickets for the premiere of Everything or Nothing, the documentary.
Oh yeah, yeah.
At Leicester Square, and it was great to see so many sort of, because it was quite a celebration. There was, I think Ken Adam was there, and I think I was sat next to, or like a row in front of, the woman that played Sylvia Trench. I think, if she's right. Still with us. So it was just so many random people were like popping. I was like, oh, that's so and so, and Charles Dance was there, and so that was I think sort of a highlight for me. Whilst the dream is to properly attend a black tie Bond premiere, I think my chances are limited.
Well, they're special. I've done the last two, and they're a special night. Nothing compares, especially at the Albert Hall as well, where everyone's literally in together. I've got good memories of the last two Craig premieres.
Speaking of which, I saw the Albert Hall are doing Casino Royale with a live orchestra later.
They are, yes.
Are you going to that?
I am, yes. I'm going to go on the Saturday. I think they've added another day due to demand. Yeah, I'm going to be cool to see it. It's a strange place to see a film. It's sometimes like watching a film on the side of a cliff. But the sound quality in there is just stunning. So I'm just really keen just to hear a live orchestra. And I've not done any of those sort of live movie orchestra things. I'm curious how they work and how the sound. Actually, I'm sort of thinking, how's the sound split? They must obviously have no orchestra on the actual soundtrack.
It's fun. I saw Aliens end of last year, and it was fantastic. And you've got it's a little bit weird because you have the whole orchestra, and then the audio must be a separate channel. And I'd say the only distracting thing is that you've got subtitles on the screen as well, in case the audio, the orchestra drowns out any of the dialogue.
Oh, okay.
But for me, I've never been to the Royal Albert Hall before, so that was quite an event in itself. Seeing something with a cracking score is definitely worth it. So I think I'm going to try and get to that. Yeah,
you should have try and get some tickets if you can. And I think it's the beginning of hopefully a series of, they'll hopefully do some more. So I'd love to see On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Oh, that's fantastic soundtrack. Yeah, really like that score. Very sort of synthy and stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I realise I've been taking up quite a bit of your time, so I'll two more questions. So this is a bit of a sort of a dinner party question that I have for Bond fans. So, Ultimate Bond. If you could remake any Bond film or book with any of the Bond actors, who and what would it be? So, for example, Daniel Craig in On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Oh, I hate this question. Not that it's your question. I just
it's a tough one.
It's that hindsight that only movie fans sort of project onto things. I'd love to have seen Roger Moore do Diamonds Are Forever, because it feels very tailored for him, and that whole idea of, well, they do it in Live and Let Die. He's like the sort of British or English fish out of water and dropped into Harlem of the early 70s. The idea of him being in Vegas appeals. And I think it's a beautiful script. It gets knocked, that film. I think it's a delicious movie, and it's got the best dialogue of any Bond film. So maybe Roger Moore in Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah, I definitely think Roger's better suited to Vegas than Connery. He'd definitely have more fun.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I suppose out of curiosity, seeing what Dalton's third Bond film might have been, it wasn't really going to be what GoldenEye became, but seeing perhaps an actor doing another role, another film, rather than swap them over.
We definitely, both Charlie and I have a lot of love for Dalton, and it is that sort of what if it would have been great to get at least one more out of him, because he's a fantastic actor and a fantastic Bond as well.
I'd love to see Craig also do that sort of big Bond. I mean, they hinted at it and did a little bit of it with Spectre. I'd love to see the mammoth cathedral sets and guys in matching orange jumpsuits, but that's probably about my nostalgia and age than anything else. But I'd love to see a really, not camp, but a real sort of baroque, nearly sort of kitschy Bond film. We don't live in those times anymore, but probably for good reasons. So.
Yeah, I don't know. It is a lovely what if just to see him how Daniel Craig would cope in such an environment. There was, as you say, there was shades of that in Spectre.
Yeah, well, also we've got this thing now where we're all, I don't see globalization as a bad thing overall, but Bond particularly. The idea of going anywhere on a plane is not as exotic as it used to be, so it's harder for Bond to sort of surprise and be exotic with all these locations and different backdrops to the film. So I think Craig's done very well.
Well, indeed, I was going to say where's left for Bond to go. I think is it Australia and is it maybe
there's plenty of places, but for different reasons. Usually logistics, finances, also, windows of crew. Australia's a brilliant idea. We've all had sort of fancy ideas about that. I'd love to see Bond going to a sort of Station A sheep shearing farm that turns out to Hughes Lab or something. But it's if it possibly, I mean, it would have been done before if they could. And like you say, Africa. I think there might have been a sort of Africa leaning in the early drafts of Spectre, but that got pulled out a bit. I'd like to see Craig go back to Asia and what used to be called in the 70s the Far East. I'd like to see Craig with sort of real martial art Bond film.
Yeah, no, that's something Skyfall, it was hinted at with Macau, and that's a part of the Bond sort of the behind the scenes stuff that I love. That how much of it's actually done at Pinewood. Yeah. How much even that as at the opening of Casino Royale, where it's supposed to be Sierra Leone or something, and that's just the Pinewood backlots. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, it's always some forest just outside Pinewood. But that's the beauty of it. The artifice that's how it works. Well, it's the fact that it works. It's just completely believable. And finally, I've got to ask, what are you currently working on? Do you have another novel in the pipeline? I do. I'm in what movie people call post-production. Literally been doing a big day on it today. I'm doing got a new book out in the autumn. Or the fall, as they say in America. As a little hint there, it is a prequel sequel to Catching Bullets, and I'm not going to say any more, but it's certainly in Retro Ramble's sort of neck of the 80s movie store woods. That's what I'm saying. Well, I am very intrigued and definitely look forward to it. So obviously Catching Bullets is still available. So it's just to let our listeners know. So Catching Bullets features forwards from Sherlock and League of Gentlemen writer Mark Gatiss and the lovely Barbara Broccoli, and afterward by Bond Girl legend and Mark's future wife Maud Adams. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. And it's available from good bookstores. I know it's definitely on Amazon. That's where I got it. Yeah, it's very much out there. All the good bookshops, even, and a couple of the bad ones. And yeah, it's very much on Amazon and direct from the publishers as well. And yeah, Kindle and all various formats. Wonderful. Well, we'll definitely put links to it on our blog on the website as well. Thank you. But thank you very much for your time. Not at all. No, it's been good fun. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So that was our interview with Mark O'Connell, hosted by Retro Ramble's George McGhee. Sorry about the echo there on George's side. We did our best with the quality, but it can't always be perfect. So if you've not checked out Mark's book, get thee to Amazon or check out markoconnell.co.uk, and obviously it's available in plenty of bookshops. It's a great read. It's got forwards from Barbara Broccoli of Eon, and also some nice kind words from Mark Gatiss, he of the TV show Sherlock and League of Gentlemen. So it gets a thumbs up from some very important people and also a thumbs up from us, so be sure to check it out. Next time we will be back to the usual format, both of us brothers McGhee, taking a retro ramble on the 1980s cult classic that is The Goonies. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.